I'm Professor Andy Bush from the Royal Brompton Hospital, London, where I'm a consultant paediatrician. Thank you for listening to this clip. We all know that cigarette smoking has caused untold damage in terms of premature death and disease, and we all want to protect children from smoking. But a new hazard has come, and that's vaping. We do not know the safety of these vapes. The phrase, "they are 95% safer than tobacco," is based on opinion, not fact. We do not have the data on long-term effects, and this point was made in a Lancet editorial. It took 30 years before the late great Sir Richard Dole proved that smoking caused cancer. We cannot afford to wait and be complacent. These things are being marketed at children with bright colours, flavours, influencers on TikTok and other places, and we are sleepwalking into a generation of nicotine-addicted children. We cannot allow this.
Hello and welcome, inspiring youth leaders from across the globe. We are thrilled to have you all here today on this remarkable occasion of International Youth Day. My name is Laura Salgado, and it is an honor to extend a warm virtual welcome on behalf of the Global Center for Good Governance in Tobacco Control, GGTC, to our most anticipated webinar, Taking Control, Youth and Tobacco Awareness, Empowering Youth to Counter the Tobacco Industry. I want to thank our partners for their collaboration hosting this webinar, the Alianza Juvenil, a No Smoking Generation, International Youth Tobacco Control, South African Tobacco Free Forum, Youth Health Organization, and Youth for Tobacco Control, with the support from the African Tobacco Control Alliance, ATCA, European Network for Smoking and Tobacco Prevention, ENSP, and GGTC. And a particular thanks to ATCA and ESP for helping out with the simultaneous interpretation this morning. To all the young leaders who have joined us today, thank you for your presence and your commitment. This is our moment to connect, to learn, and to amplify our voices. To voices against tobacco industry manipulations. Let's seize with vigor, knowing that by doing so, we are paving the way for healthier, more empowerment world for generations to come. Without further, I would like to introduce our moderator. She is Katja Sik, is a public health enthusiast from Slovenia. She is currently working as a manager on youth health issues at the International Youth Health Organization, and she is part of the newly established WHO Youth Council, and has previously worked for Slovenia NCD Alliance. Her areas of expertise include NCDs, environmental health, health policy, and meaningful youth engagement. Katja, thank you for your participation today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Laura. I am very happy to be here and to guide you all through the experience today. We have a speakers lineup that is, truth be told, quite wonderful, and we have it from all over the globe. So we will really hear lots about different experiences, different stories, also everything from the grassroots to the international and global level. So without further ado, because obviously I'm not gonna take a lot of the spotlight away from the speakers, we will now jump to the very first section of our webinar. And we will be discussing a little bit about how can we understand tobacco industry interference. So I will ask Judy to kickstart our first question on Menti. And this goes to all the participants that are here in the webinar. We would ask you to connect to Menti, and you will see the code. It will be shared very soon on the screen. Judy, please let me know once that is done. Perfect. So you can join menti.com and use the code that you see on the slide. And the first question that we have for you is, what does tobacco industry interference mean to you? We will give you about a minute or two to answer this question before we move on to our speakers. But just to kind of set the tone for today's discussion, you can use either your phone or you can use your computer to log into Menti. Perfect. So we have just started receiving responses. And I see already that the tone is quite similar in the sense of how do we all perceive interference. So it leads to bad health. We have digital advertisement. So I think that will connect very nicely to one of our following sections of the webinar, where we will be talking more about marketing as well as social media. Have a lot of words in regards to corruption and just negativity in the sense of what interference is. Perfect. So we will keep the Menti open for a little bit longer. And while it is running, I'm just going to do a very quick introduction of our very first speaker. And she will be referring to the different tactics that are used by the tobacco industry to kind of manipulate the public's opinion as well as influence policies. And that is especially important when it comes to youth and targeting young people across the globe. So the first speaker I would invite to the mic is Louisa Johansson, and she is the education manager at the Swedish organization A Non-Smoking Generation. And she has a background in global studies and global health. She has over 10 years of experience and is a part of the NCD Child Young Leaders program. So without further ado, Louise, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Katja. Today we see a totally new landscape with tobacco than we did just 5 years ago. We all know that. So with my associates from NCD Child, from Jordan, Nigeria, and Australia, we wrote an article about the different tobacco industry tactics in our regions to raise awareness among young people and to call decision makers to action. And we see similar patterns in all of our countries, with adolescent nicotine usage on the rise, as well as circumvention of laws. In Nigeria, tobacco consumption among young people is partly driven by industry normalization of tobacco products, depicting tobacco as the new cool through celebrities. And with the highest tobacco prevalence in the Middle Eastern region, Jordan has low tobacco prices and it's easily accessible to young people, making adolescent smoking prevalence high and the use of vapes are increasing. In Australia, smoking rates amongst children are low, but e-cigarettes, vapes, and nicotine pods threaten this. Packaging, flavoring, and marketing towards children have increased the use of new nicotine products. And here in Sweden, the use of nicotine pouches, also called snus, has skyrocketed among young people due to super targeted marketing towards mainly young girls and women. So conclusively, in our article, we see that tobacco companies, they continue to find ways to reach young generations globally. And their so-called innovations that's fronted with this harm reduction approach, it's only a cover. It's a cover to hide and to support their unethical core business of keeping and initiating nicotine-addicted people and getting them hooked early. So we wrote 5 articles in the article to 5 recommendations in the article to protect young people from the tobacco industry. And it includes to fully implement the Framework Convention in our countries, to restrict sales by year-born generations, to make extensive laws on tobacco and nicotine so that the industry can't innovate, to include young people in tobacco prevention and endgame strategies, and to increase knowledge of tobacco harm among young people. So let me speak a little bit more about the Swedish side of this. Like here in Sweden, we have snus, as I mentioned, which is like a pouch of tobacco and nicotine that you put under your lip. And right now, 40% of Swedish high school students have tried nicotine pouches and 50% have tried vaping. And one of the most obvious strategies that we see is targeting young girls and women with feminist statements, also called femwashing. The industry has been trying to redefine feminism into some kind of consumable lifestyle and selling the idea of empowerment through nicotine use. And it's been super frustrating and sad to see some of my favorite profiles doing marketing for nicotine. Unfortunately, they have been very successful reaching young women. But I think that these profiles, these influencers, just like everyone else, they need knowledge. And that has been one of our biggest challenges, to reach people with this kind of knowledge. We've been sharing fact-based information with my organization, A Non-Smoking Generation, in schools and on social media since the products were launched in 2016. But still, it has been challenging for us to reach young people and our decision makers with this knowledge, mainly due to limited resources because of low funding for tobacco prevention. And people, they are confused and misinformed, and it's just like the tobacco industry want us to be. Most people here, they don't know that nicotine is derived from the tobacco plant and that the new products usually have a higher nicotine level, and also that they are a part of the global tobacco industry, contributing to devastating environmental effects and several human rights violations. Lastly, one major challenge for us has been, like, working with political advocacy is grounded in this tobacco control narrative. It's how we allow the industry to develop new products and circumvent current laws repeatedly. It isn't sustainable. And I think tobacco control, the narrative, it implies that we just accept that tobacco would always be with us. So at A Non-Smoking Generation, we're working on shifting this societal mindset that assumes and accepts the tobacco industry's continued presence in our world. We want to move beyond tobacco control to the end of tobacco. But as I said, it's been super hard in our political landscape. A lot of the vital stakeholders, they run the tobacco industry's errands. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Louisa. It's very important to hear how, for example, different types of social washing actually influence the younger generations, especially bringing together different nicotine and tobacco products that, for example, the healthcare professionals, as well as social workers and so on, simply do not have the means to deal with. So thank you so much for shedding the light on this. Now I will invite to the floor our second panelist on this topic, and she's Caroline Bennett, and she works as the community outreach specialist with the Truth Initiative's community and youth engagement team, where she supports youth engagement in the truth activism agenda through digital and on-the-ground tactics, communications, and also campaigning. So Caroline, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Katya, and thank you, Louise, for providing such a great overview before I get started. So good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Happy International Youth Day. It's great to see all of you. Just to give a bit of background again, thank you for the introduction. Truth Initiative is America's largest nonprofit public health organization fighting the forces of tobacco, nicotine, and addiction. Really, our main goal, as I think we all share here, is to reduce the presence of tobacco and nicotine in our culture here in the States. And we do that in a couple of key ways. The main initiative of the organization is our public awareness and education campaign, but we also do a lot in the activism space, engaging youth leaders and communities, as well as through research and policy efforts. So just to give a bit of background on where I'm coming from, as Katja mentioned, I am coming from our community and youth engagement space. So very excited to be here to talk about this topic. So let's get into it, shall we? So as I think we all know, and Louise gave a really great overview, despite decades of progress here in the States on tobacco prevention, education, and cessation, public health, advocates and leaders still face a really fierce foe in the tobacco industry. And we still see these tactics, and really they have doubled down in their marketing and their strategy as e-cigarettes have come onto the market. And that has really provided this entryway, as Louise very clearly stated, to young audiences. And we see this very overtly in their advertisements. Back in 2016, 2018 era, we saw Juul very clearly presenting their advertisements to young people. Now we are seeing the repercussions of that in various legal debates here in the States. But unfortunately, even as they face legal challenges, these industries still continue to press on with their strategies to essentially ensure that they are guaranteeing new consumers, making sure that they are able to sustain their businesses through targeting young people with their products. And so we see this take shape in a few really key ways. First, the industry has inserted themselves very overtly into scientific research and academic spaces, which is just extremely disappointing, because I think most people think of those spaces as having a lot of integrity, very, tightly engineered, very clear. Those spaces are meant to be accurate and factual. And we've seen the tobacco industry really lean into that through funding primary research studies. We're talking about things, trying to prove their product as cessation devices when they've not gone through the proper regulatory pathways to have them discerned as cessation devices, but still trying to prove that through the research. We've seen them buy advertisements and what we call advertorials here in the States, where you advertise through a longer, opinion type writing piece in places like the New York Times, the Boston Globe, other kind of public facing media spaces where they've sponsored content. And we've also seen it in, again, their ways of rehabilitating their image, essentially in the name of promoting public health, when we know that that is extremely opposite of what their goal is, and really not what's at the top of their priority list. And so we've seen this very clearly. And at Truth Initiative, we have established a steering committee back in 2021 of various policy and academic leaders, essentially to focus on this exact topic of the industry interference in research and in policy and in other spaces. The industry has a very robust presence in the policymaking process here in the States, and that is all funded because they have a lot of resources. And so that is very challenging to face from a public health standpoint. And so this steering committee and the folks that are on it really aim to take a proactive approach to eliminating this influence of the industry in these various spaces. At the same time, the tobacco industry has tried to position themselves, again, like I said, as not only a friend of public health, but a friend of various social movements. So when we think about things like social justice, environmental justice, mental health, all of those things, the industry has really tried to, again, rebrand their image as being aligned with those topics, when we know it's not true to their intentions and to their products and ultimately what their main goal is, which is to generate profit. And so they have tried to position non-combustible tobacco products as, again, public health tools, which is, not correct. They have really masked the predatory marketing tactics. Louise described the marketing of tobacco products to women. I think here in the States, we've seen very overt marketing of various products to specific racial and ethnic groups, which is just extremely disheartening. And the industry has really tried to co-opt that as we're a friend of these racial and ethnic groups. And it's very disheartening to see. They also really co-opted during the COVID-19 pandemic, really got in there with appeals to folks' mental health, loneliness, and all of those things that we were feeling at the very beginning of COVID, trying to position themselves as a friend, positioning their products as a stress reliever. All of those things we've seen very clearly. And so that has been, very challenging to contend with. But the good news is that our advocates and folks around the country have really taken this on in a meaningful way from a storytelling standpoint and taking control of the narrative to shed light on these tactics and really expose them for what they are, which is, I think, extremely powerful. And I think that is really the main tool that we have to counter this interference, is really to tell that story in a cohesive way, really just name it for what it is, and also name it to the right people. So when we talk about going to decision makers and policymakers, I think the main goal is really to educate on this influence that the industry has and ensure that as many people as possible have this information so that they can make more informed decisions going forward, to make sure that, we are cutting off the industry's influence in as many spaces as we can, and really making sure we're driving the actual goals of these social movements that the industry has co-opted to ensure, a brighter future for everyone. So that is my spiel. I will stop there. Thank you so much. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Caroline. We will have a Q&A session later on in the webinar. So in case any of the participants, if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A box that you will see in the Zoom, or you can potentially even use the chat as a function to ask the questions, and we will make sure to collect them and then later ask them to the speakers. So Caroline, thank you so much for really highlighting how the industry is basically playing with a lot of the emotions, with the different growth stages, with the different tools that they have available. And obviously, they have way more money than we do in order to kind of push all of those matters into the hands of young people. So now that we kind of set the scene and talked about the different types of tobacco industry interference, how are they spinning their image around and really trying to make that shift into being seen as something positive, we will now go into the second section of our webinar. So we'll delve a little bit deeper into the economic and environmental impact of big tobacco. And we have one more question prepared for you on Mentimeter. So Judy, I would again ask you to share the screen. Hopefully everyone stayed connected. If not, the code remains the same, so you can jump back onto the Menti and answer the second question. Perfect. So our next question is just what kind of impact does on the economy and environment does big tobacco have in your country? So try to think of your national level, local level, in your community. How is that potentially seen? What was your experience? Did you see something that really impacted you, or something that you just perceived as, something threatening potentially, since big tobacco does have a lot of influence? So please feel free to engage. So we do have a lot of health cost burden already here amongst the responses. high usage of tobacco products and nicotine products, also pollution that goes basically from the chain of farming the tobacco and all the way up to the production, transportation, and so on. The policies are very weak. The cigarette butts are also the main polluter in the world. So, you know, a lot of impact that goes into different directions. So now, while we're still waiting for your responses, I just wanted to let you know that this next section of the webinar will actually take place in Spanish. So make sure to use the interpretation button that you can see on the bottom of the screen to choose your selected and preferred language. We will have two panelists, and they will be talking about the big tobacco industry, obviously about the financial impact on smoking that and what it has on health and development. What impact does it have on pollution? They will also mention and give us some new updates about the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, as well as the UN Plastic Treaty. So without further ado, I would like to invite to the floor Blanca Lorente from Fundación ANAF and Michael Kaufmann-Falczuk from Consciente Colectivo. Blanca, Michael, are you ready?
Sí, muchísimas gracias, Katia, por esa introducción y muchas gracias por la invitación.
Thank you very much, Katia, for this introduction. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share these few minutes of conversation with Michael. So let's talk about our perspective and the reasons why I began to work in tobacco control have a lot to do with a perception of the costs in use. So I'm going to start with this example and personal experience. I was a professor at a university in the city of Bogota, Colombia, working with youngsters, 20, 22 years of age. And at the time that in Colombia, in the beginning of this century, we had a spike in consumption and addiction to tobacco. We had a daily experience in Bogota with this, and it was evident for me the health problems and performance of my students. Even they themselves shared it. I had students that said, "Professor, I'm not going to be able to work in Bogota." They were economic students, so their dream was to work in the economic sector, but my health is not going to allow it. Bogota is a city that is 2,600 meters high above sea level, so there were students that could not be for 3 hours in a classroom because they had to go out, and the anguish that this created. So these were consequences that were immediate. So these are aggregate level costs that we have in the economy, but this real and true manifestation is materialized in everyone's lives. So I wanted to bring that forth for discussion. In Colombia, we've estimated the economic costs in two senses: the sanitary costs, which everyone already knows clearly with tobacco addiction, and it has sanitary costs apart from the lives it takes and the disease it causes when we are going to assess the cost to our health system. So the costs are catastrophic. That's what we call them in Colombia, catastrophic. And of course, they are high cost diseases, illnesses, cardiovascular, among others. And the treatment of other illnesses is also made even more serious and aggravated by alcohol and tobacco, like diabetes, for example. So this has already been evaluated, estimated, and measured. I'm going to speak about the Colombian case, but it's very much in line with what we know from everywhere in the world. So we have a public insurance program in Colombia that's covered by all the taxpayers. And so it costs us 6 billion pesos a year. That's a little under 1 percentage point of our GDP. So it's an enormous sanitary cost. And we've estimated in 2017, the ministry estimated the losses in productivity. That's the other area of economic costs that are very important. So in other words, the smokers that have disability, temporary or permanent, and absenteeism, and what we call presentism, which is to be present at work, but not to be able to perform as you have to. So this is something we see at work, and this jointly is a much higher cost. In the Colombian case, with that 6 billion that we have in sanitary costs per year, the productive experience is estimated at 11 billion. So the total is 17 billion in losses because of the damage on the economy caused by tobacco consumption. So it's about 2 percentage points of our GDP, of everything that is produced in our economy. Tobacco costs 2%. So this is enormous. So one single product that is sold causing this type of damage is an enormous damage, and the consequences on the economy are never compared to the size of these costs. So I briefly wanted to talk about the social costs that go beyond these. And in the Colombian case, this is an estimate. So we ask what happens to a smoker, a young smoker, like the majority of our smokers. Everything that's been invested from the family, from the resources to be educated. Colombia has progressed in the last few decades to improve access to education of children and youth. We're far from the ideal, but we have still some important indicators in improvement in that sense. But what happens with that investment when this child or young person becomes ill prematurely, reduces their ability and their capacity, even intellectual capacity? We know that nicotine has an effect on the ability to concentrate on other important aspects. So we, in Spanish, we say that we are deleting or erasing with our elbow what we wrote with our hands. So it took 10 years of education in Colombia for every smoker, an investment in education. So we have about 4.5 million smokers, as you would say, in youth. So briefly, I would refer to the effect of tobacco consumption in terms of social cost. That's differential between the role of men and women in these countries. The majority of the caregivers and patients of illnesses caused by tobacco consumption are women. Women who have to get away from our jobs or have more flexibility to be able to take care of a patient during their illness and treatment, many times for years, and rehabilitation. So it takes many, many years to recover. And many times this comes from the family. So there's families that cannot pay external help. And we know with COVID, the women who had to be dedicated to this and who had enormous difficulties for the labor market and similar positions than we had before the pandemic. So this is not a minor thing. The differential impact from the gender dimension is also something important. And all of this causes poverty, both monetary and multidimensional in many ways. But I'd like to hear Michael, who could delve into other dimensions of the cost that were also mentioned in the introduction. So thank you. Please, Michael. Thank you, Laura, and welcome everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure. I greet you from Buenos Aires, Argentina, and it could not be another way with a mate drink. Mate is a typical drink from Argentina. For those of you who don't know it, hopefully you can try it one day. But briefly, I'll introduce myself. I'm part of Collective Awareness, Consciente Colectivo, an organization from Argentina, and I'm also part of CREA, a Latin American youth network that works for human rights. So taking many of the concepts that Blanca brought and to mention some bullet points that I think are important, I would add a question in the Menti, which has to do with whether humans can inhabit our own planet. Spoiler alert, I think we're all going to say no. This is the only planet we have to live. So we need to add the dimension in all these conversations of what happens with the environment. And I like to talk about the social environmental aspect. Countries like Argentina, Colombia, and I would say all developing countries, no environmental impact is only environmental, but there's also a social impact involved. Argentina is a country with over 40% of its population living in a context of poverty, and the environmental impact in the tobacco industry have the ones who most suffer are the populations who live in the context of poverty. For one of the topics that I think is central is we have deforestation as one of the main consequences. And there's an important piece of information. More than 90% of deforestation worldwide in the tobacco industry occurs in developing countries. This is a piece of information that we have to remember. At the same time, deforestation generates the expelling of rural and local communities that have to be evicted from their homes because the industry is evicting them. And that happens because of the political details and nuances of each country. That has to stop because there has to be policies that are at the same level so that they could stop those organizations that have more power even than the political parties. And in Latin America, this happens daily. And at the same time, if we talk about deforestation, we have to talk about what it generates in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, because we're talking about climate crisis, and in a context where we have more and more clear examples on how the crisis is affecting everyone, deforestation speeds up global warming, and this can only be lived in planet Earth. So the environmental variable in these conversations is urgent and priority. At the same time, there's another matter that was mentioned as well, which is quite relevant. It has to do with contamination by plastic. Cigarette butts represent one of the most important waste items in the world. And important piece of information, it's always good to mention, worldwide, there are plastic islands, and those islands are larger than countries. A few weeks ago, some people present here, we had to be in the second instance of negotiations for a global plastic treaty. So there's an island that's larger than France. Imagine the seriousness of this problem. And that happens at the central level, but not just in terms of plastics, but also in terms of toxic chemical substances contaminating the waters, the soil, and the air we breathe. So I think we need to delve into the narrative of an integral outlook and the sanitary variable, environmental and social variables that are intertwined for the narrative of the different realities. And so that every time, more and more, we can delve into narratives that involve more sectors of society. We're in a context where, unfortunately, these problems continue to grow, humanitarian and politically. And so we have to be strong, those of us who are in the different sectors, and knowing that those who are on the other side always have more resources and power. And those lobbies are not just have to name them, but also the ones on this side without a conflict of interest, another important topic. We have to create a brotherhood and work together for more solid narratives. To close, I understand I'm on the limit of my time, and I want to leave some time for comments or questions. I think it's relevant to the role of youth. In my case, I'm 25. I would love today not have to be in a conference like this, but I celebrate this. But the central point is that the young people are becoming responsible of things that we should not have to be. So we should be in other contexts. And that has to do also with receiving something worse than, you know, that we don't want the next generations to receive. And my closing statement, sorry, is what's happening to the next generation. What world are we leaving them? What happens to the political environment, both nationally and internationally? Personally, and in Latin America, it is not a priority, this topic, and we should give it more priority, because we can't promote policies without a budget. We don't need just ideas, we need ambitious policies, and in a context of such imbalance of power, we need to touch these interests, because these policies require that. And those interests are going to be in the tobacco industry and many others that contaminate the planet that we live in. Thank you very much.
Yo quisiera brevemente mencionar, referirme a un par de
Briefly.
cosas que has dicho, mija. Yo sé que estamos ya sobre el tiempo y prometo ser breve, Katia, para no angustiarte a ti por los temas de moderación.
I don't want to anguish you with these matters. The political response should be comprehensive and transversal. And mention this, to leave this at the table, the public policies that work. First of all, let's remember the significance of supporting the decided increase in taxes, which is the most decisive policy that's been implemented. Understanding that taxes will never cover the cost. In Colombia, these costs that I've mentioned, what we collect, the comparison is 10 times larger, and only that part of the economic cost of what is collected, but it does help us reduce the consumption and, of course, the impact. In international treaties like the Framework Agreement for Tobacco, we have Article 19, which has been ignored, basically. It's the one that, and Michal, maybe you can look into this and say it more appropriately given your education as an attorney, but it makes us enforce the damage that the industry, the remediation of these issues and mitigating damage as well, not with expressions that are somewhat very superficial of supposed social responsibility actions that have never covered the actual cost. And last, this integrality or comprehensiveness, and the interaction of treaties like the Agreement for Tobacco Control and the convention that is being prepared on plastics. That agreement should have specific measures to counteract and stop this huge contamination caused by the industry. It's just one of the aspects of contamination that you have mentioned already. And I think there's many things to talk about, but I think we have more energy than time, unfortunately. I think that here our colleagues would like to highlight the study that has been published for 100 countries around environmental costs of tobacco consumption. Those of you who don't know this, you should look into it. This material is wonderful, and it helps us transform this in our own narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, both to Blanca and Michael. It was really a pleasure just to hear how many different issues we are actually facing, which is, I'm not gonna lie, a little bit daunting, especially as younger generations are kind of taking on the baton and trying to run forward with it. but especially hearing about the social cost, both the generational and the gender gap that are being influenced by the tobacco industry, how the vulnerable populations, especially youth across the world, are actually the ones feeling the effects and consequences of weak policies, the lack of education, the lack of measures to address the environmental crisis and so on the most. And you have mentioned the UN Plastic Treaty, where we have seen, for example, in the past couple of negotiations, that certain countries are actually deliberately delaying the progress towards actually achieving the treaty. And the recent talks about, for example, stopping the Amazon rainforest deforestation amongst the different countries from South America have also not really been very fruitful. So I have one question for both of you, and this might be the question of all questions, so hopefully I will not scare you away with this. But how can we as youth actually fight back and change the narrative? So how can we convince the decision makers to actually invest in long-term health and well-being rather than short-term, mandate level economic stability that has extremely negative effects, where this industry, especially the big tobacco industry, just bulldozes over health, environment, and so on? So what would be your number one tip for us?
You want me to answer?
Yes, please go ahead.
I'll give just one piece of advice that comes from my own experience. Last year, we were pushing hard for a tax increase in tobacco taxes in Colombia. And it was, as usual, very, very difficult. And it was very encouraging for me when we reached out to a group of youth leaders from one of the universities here in Bogota. And they were wonderful. First of all, they wanted to learn more. They were not experts in tobacco control, but they wanted to learn more. And obviously, we wanted them to be empowered to talk about the issue. And they went to Congress and they talked to the politicians directly. So I think that we need to increase the knowledge of the youth leaders that are already very, very eager to participate in the political environment because they already have the tools. It's amazing. At least I talked from the Colombian perspective. How well, I was surprised. I said, when I was 20, I wouldn't have been able to do that. And these young people, they were really inspiring. And that changed enormously the balance. We managed that 1/3 of the Congress supported the measure. It didn't succeed that day, but it was an enormous advance. So giving the power to youth and finding the right avenues for participation in policy-making scenarios is very, very powerful. And it's the way to go, in my opinion.
Super, thank you so much. Yeah, Mijael, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Creo que hoy tendremos algo que antes no, que es este aparato.
I think today we have something we didn't have before, which is this, a mobile phone. Before, it was impossible to think about this, and now with social networks, we can reach thousands, millions of people in the world who we could not have reached at another point in time. And I think today we have to become friendly with awareness of social networks, being very critical of them, which I think is not a minor topic, but understanding its functionality, which we could say is somewhat perverse, but it's a tool that leads us to millions of people. I think it's one of the most powerful things we have nowadays, and we have to use it in our favor to solidify these narratives, allowing for us to collectively build together with other benchmarks, other leaders that maybe are thousands of kilometers away. But once again, through an Instagram Live, we can share ideas and reach an audience which we might have not been able to reach a few years ago.
Thank you so much to both of you, especially for sharing your experiences, your stories, your insights. And since you both mentioned inspiring young people, this is also giving a very nicely way into our next section, where we're going to hear from inspiring young leaders from across the world about their actions and their communities, as well as how are they achieving the results that they are so passionate about. I definitely agree with both of you. It's very important to just harness the passion of young people, really guide them in the right direction, because they are the generations that will, keep up the good fight and try to, push the legislation to go the right way. So now we have, as always, the next main question prepared for all of you, and I will ask Judy to once again share the slide. And I also have a question. I think I have the link here, so you should have it in the chat because it is a bit of a different code. And the question that we'll ask you to answer now is, what can youth do to take back this control and really protect current and future young generations from the harmful industry practices? And you can think about the practices that you have heard about from the panelists today, but you can also, take a jab at any other harmful practice that you have potentially seen in your own reality. So we'll give you a minute or two to answer this. You can also use the chat to answer them if you are not able to connect to the Menti. Perfect. We have the answers flowing in. So the one I saw first was obviously education. Sharing the knowledge, amplifying perspectives. So speaking up about it, raising awareness, super, super important. Really having the legislation to be on your side, to advocate for better legislation, and teach each other about things. That doesn't mean just peer-to-peer education, but also intergenerational learning as well, because as young people, we cannot do it alone. And yes, definitely agree also with the one that says, never be content. The world can always get better. So thank you so much to everyone for these answers. Feel free to still drop them in the box while I introduce our next speaker. So as mentioned, we are now going towards to hear from inspiring young leaders from across the world. And the first one to take the floor is DJ Yearwood, who grew up surrounded by family members who smoked, and he always knew he just didn't like tobacco. And over time, he developed a passion for youth advocacy, really looking always for different ways to engage and how to advocate for his peers. He worked with his school district to implement tobacco prevention clubs. He founded his own nonprofit, worked with lawmakers to allocate $2.9 million towards Missouri's tobacco prevention program, and much, much more. DJ, we're super excited to hear from you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. The first thing that I want to say is that I want to reiterate that young people should never be content. So that was something that I saw in the last slide, or in the last answer section. And young people really across the world, that's the most important thing to keep note of, is that young people should never be content. When we're building on our foundations, when we're addressing problems in our communities, the tobacco industry and harmful industries across the world always want us to get in a place where we're comfortable. I was talking with somebody last week about how the tobacco industry gets to a point where they try to play like they're the good guy too. And I know we've heard that a couple of times on here, how when they try to play like they're the good guy, we tend to get comfortable. The enemies are never the good guys. And so that's something that we should always keep in mind when we're trying to build upon our own platforms, when we're trying to address the issues within our own communities. One thing, for example, is that Missouri is the worst state in tobacco control in the entire United States. So we have the lowest tobacco tax, we have the weakest laws, we have no statewide regulations as to the sale of tobacco products. And so when we come into that, we see a number of challenges for regular lobbyists, adult lobbyists, to bring about these changes. And so as youth advocates, we have a special ability to connect with lawmakers because it is our belief that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And we're able to conduct this in a manner and carry this out in a manner that helps those lawmakers amplify that. And that's why we're able to secure some big victories.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, DJ, for kind of like the introduction into what we will delve a little bit deeper later on with the questions that we have for you. So now I'm going to move on to Lesego Mateme, who is a 25-year-old tobacco control advocate from South Africa, and the projects coordinator, or the head of technical communications, technically, for the South African Tobacco Free Youth Forum. So his background is in psychology and media studies, and his role in the forum includes both coordinating as well as supporting grassroots and grasstops advocacy campaign. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Katja, and good afternoon from South Africa. The presentations have been very, very insightful, and I do agree a lot with what DJ has said. It is not one thing about young people is that we always need to continue in our fight, because the moment we feel like we are okay and then we're relaxing is the moment where they start inventing new poisons to kill us. So essentially, this is also one of the key things that we're focused on, or one of the things that we're facing in South Africa at the moment, is that our bill is not, what's it called, the current Tobacco Control Act in South Africa is not as strong as it should be, given the advancements within the tobacco environment. So tobacco products are currently very, very accessible to young people, and it is I live between a primary school and a high school and also some universities, so it is very common for me to see a high school learner in the morning, getting their morning smoke, and similarly it is also very common to see young people during weekends indulging in things such as shisha, hookah pipes, as well as the newest member into the tobacco group, which is electronic nicotine delivery systems, or your vapes. These are quite, this is what SET5, I guess, is focused on, or is worried about the most, because these products, as it stands in South Africa, are not regulated, but then they are freely found in our communities. There is different dupes, and then now they're even making them, we have, of course, disposable vapes, and then we also have those that can be recharged and refilled. And then now there are illicit kinds of we have illicit cigarettes, we now have illicit vapes, but then in a sense that these are vapes that are not from these actual manufacturers, but then they're like dupes, and then we never know what the chemicals that are in the e-liquids are from, or whether or not the devices are safe or not. So basically, currently in South Africa, from a policy perspective, we are sort of like pushing for the enactment of our tobacco products, our tobacco control bill. In full, it's called the Tobacco Products and Electronic Deliveries Delivery Systems Control Bill of 2022. So what this bill essentially sets to do is to just tighten up close the loopholes rather that exist within our current tobacco control product tobacco control policy. But then the main thing is to ensure that these electronic delivery systems are regulated in the same way as existing tobacco products are, and then they are made less accessible, and that young people are less exposed to them. I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience, as well as all the issues that you are facing. I'm sure that these are actually felt around the world as well. So now that we have traveled from USA to South Africa, we're now visiting another continent, and we're traveling to Bangladesh. And we will have Tabassum Khanum Ratri speaking about youth empowerment and mobilization in tobacco control advocacy. And she is a part of the development organization of the rural poor. So without further ado, Ratri, take it away.
Thank you so much for passing me the floor. So hello, everyone. Good evening. This is Tabassum Khanum Ratri, Global Advocate from Y4TC and Youth Advocate from Bangladesh Development Organization of the Rural Poor. So ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow youths, welcome. Today I stand here not as sole representative only, but as a voice for countless youth hearts and minds that are tirelessly working for the tobacco control all around the world and from the Bangladesh. So being a youth representative, I'm proud because the youth are the torchbearers of the change and the architects of the innovations and the champions of new perspective. As I can see, there are a lot of youths here from several parts of the globe. So I'd like to say that let's have a silent shout out with the reactions in the Zoom, that is the celebration sign. I'm taking the initiative. So I want to see that everyone, youth presence here, let's have a shout out with the reactions on the Zoom. And besides that, we know that being the youth, we possess the enthusiasm and the passion to change the status quo and the invasion of the world of possibilities and turn those visions which we have in our hearts, we try to bring them in reality. So it feels lovely that I'm seeing all the signs visible in my screen. So thank you so much, everyone, for the cooperation. These are the power of youth. And I truly, and from the bottom of my heart, appreciate it. And if I talk about a shining example of the power of youth empowerment that can be witnessed in my country, Bangladesh, where the young generation has taken up the mantle of tobacco control. In a nation where tobacco use has been prevalent concern, the youth have risen to the occasion, tirelessly advocating for the healthier tobacco-free environment. Not just in Bangladesh, we the youth are fighting for the good fight of tobacco control to prevent lives of near about 8 million every year. We are trying to reduce the global deforestation of 5% of the whole world that just caused by the tobacco farming. And if I talk about my country, Bangladesh, Bangladesh was the first country to sign the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control in 2003, which was the world's first health treaty against the global tobacco epidemic. And through the treaty, after the sign, we have seen a lot of transformation in Bangladesh, where we try to work on the smokeless tobacco is brought under the purview of law. Penalty for the violation of various sections of the law has been increased, and the ban on the advertisement of tobacco products, which is, we all know, that very important to protect our future generations. And besides this, we also have managed to work on the graphical warning signs on the packets of the tobacco products. Besides this, the tax shares on the final retail product has been increased, and Bangladesh has trying to put on price hike on the single stick from 16 to 20 taka, and 15% of the front and back packaging for smoking and smokeless tobacco to have images, and no smoking in public transport, open restaurants, bars, etc. And now if I came to the question that, okay, these are the initiatives, are they really implementing? So there comes to the part of the youth and the service of the youth, where the youth done their job. So in here, my organization or me as a youth, or we all together try to work on to see the implementation, to monitor that if the laws are amended well. We have recently tried to collected plate signings, more of about like 10,000 students and youth of all around Bangladesh in support of the law amendments. And our organization tried to promote rallies and platforms and workshop and trainings to work for the cause. We also try to gain support of the other stakeholders of the social media, ministers, supermarket owners, communities, everyone all together, and everything is possible by the cooperation of the youth. And I'd like to share the good news that by the support of the youth of Bangladesh, we have been able to send a draft to the cabinet with our proposed reformations of the law and with our specific demands. For example, banning on the single stick sales and of particular increase in tax and etc. etc. So these are the movement of youth that can bring a change if we want to and if we are be optimistic about. And if I talk about the global, and we youth are not just stopped in the national level. I myself have been the privilege to witness the firsthand the transformative journey of the young individual through the Y4TC, the Youth Network for the Tobacco Control, where youth from several parts of the globe, we are trying really high to ignite the actions to determine that the fuels of our advocacy, the creativity that we employ to convey the messages, the inspiration. And I'm very happy to say that here are present some of our youth advocates from the Y4TC network. And I'd like to say that if the youth present here, we can, all of you also can bring a change in the tobacco control. Just don't lose the hope. Keep fighting the good fight. And being the youth, we will continue to invest in the youth so that we can bring a good future and continue to empower them. And don't stop becoming the leaders of the change. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the really, really motivating messages and also the great results that Bangladesh has experienced in the past. There is still, as said, a long way to go, but seeing that the youth efforts are actually being heard is something that really shows how much progress we have made in the past couple of years. So now we can finally say that we are, yes, in the 21st century where youth actually does have a voice. Okay, so now moving onwards, I will give the floor to our next panelist. And she is Elena Lee. She's the board president of the International Youth Tobacco Control. And I believe you might have a presentation, correct?
It's okay. I think I'll just speak as is. Thank you.
Okay, well, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been so inspiring to hear everyone talk so far. As she mentioned, my name is Elena Lee. I'm the board president of International Youth Tobacco Control. It's crazy to think I joined about 5 years ago, and now I'm a rising sophomore at UC Berkeley majoring in public health. So I was heavily influenced by my time in tobacco control and my interactions with everyone who is so equally passionate about this cause. International Youth Tobacco Control, or IYTC, is a 501c3 nonprofit composed of about 200 middle, high school, and college students all over the world. And now we're one of the biggest completely youth-run tobacco control organizations. With our mission statement, every teen deserves a healthy life, we engage in education, legislation, and social media, working to create the first tobacco-free generation. So I'm here today to talk about some of our experience in legislation. I'll talk about our engagement on the local level, where I'm from, Southern California, to the state level, national, and then international level. So we first started back in 2018, 2019. IYTC representatives testified at the LA County flavored tobacco ban that would prohibit the sale of all flavored products. Although it was passed, the ordinance was passed in a 5-0 decision, we still had a lot of work to do. At the time, we were all high schoolers. So when we got the call and the invitation to come speak, we all had to crowdsource into someone's mom's car and drive up to Sacramento, which was about like a 6 or 7 hour drive. It wasn't pretty, but it's what we had to do to make sure that our voices were heard. And then next, we moved on to the state level, where we advocated for SB 78, which would forbid the sale of all flavored tobacco products in the state of California. Although it was passed, it got reconstructed and didn't quite make it to the assembly into SB 793. And then our CEO was invited to a Zoom call with Governor Gavin Newsom, in which he signed the bill, and we all rejoiced. But alas, tobacco companies are so powerful. They got enough money, influence, and signatories to veto SB 793. And so it got converted into Prop 31, which led to a community voting. So the citizens of the state of California had to vote, and it passed. So after a 4-year-long journey of persistence and constantly being knocked down, youth had found the resilience and the persistence to stick to it. And now the sale of flavored tobacco products is fully banned in the state of California. Next, on the national level, our founder and president, Lisa Liu, who I wish she could be with us today, but she's taking her LSAT, which is very important, was invited to travel to Washington, D.C. to lobby and communicate with our senators Dianne Feinstein, Kamala Harris, who is now our vice president, and Representative Judy Chu to talk about the H.R. 2339 Act, which is commonly called Reversing the Youth Tobacco Epidemic of 2019. She brought these conversations and knowledge back home to California, and it inspired us to further our legislative action in our own state. This bill was eventually passed in the entire House in 2020 and ended up impacting 42 million teenagers worldwide. And we are called International Youth Tobacco Control, so we do try to delve into our international roots. In 2021, we collected the Formula One campaign. So the Formula One is like race car driving. And so on their advertisements and their races, which garner like millions of viewers, they actually endorse tobacco products and display the advertisements on their race cars. So along with 16 other countries and signatories, proud partners and connections that we've built over the years, we drafted an open letter to the president of the FIA, Gene Todd. He is now the former president. But we encouraged him to end tobacco sponsorships fully in F1. And so we wrote an open letter as well as created a video urging him to stop the endorsement of tobacco companies. And although this is still an ongoing fight, we always make sure to have our voices heard in whatever capacity possible. And so I know that we're a little short on time, so I'll keep it short there, but just my main message is that youth involvement in legislation doesn't have to be pretty. Like every time I think about it, I remember us like piling into someone's car at like 3 a.m. trying to make this Senate meeting. But it doesn't take away from the importance of youth voices. And I cannot stress how valuable it is to hear youth in legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena, especially with all the results achieved, even though the industry was throwing so many obstacles your way in terms of the voting processes and vetoing and so on. So amazing results have really been achieved. So now we still have two youth speakers in our repertoire for today. So I will invite to the floor Manik Margana Mahendra from the Indonesian Youth Council for Tactical Changes, whose 7 years of experience in advocating for health policy changes, as well as his educational foundation in public health, has deepened his understanding of end goals and enabled him to identify gaps within existing policies, especially within Indonesia. So he is very good at using the power of his social media platform to disseminate the insights on tobacco control. So Manik, please tell us your story.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Katya. So hello again, everyone. Just let me introduce myself. My name is Manik Margana Mahendra, and just like Ratri before, I'm also the ambassador from Global Youth Network for Tobacco Control, and now I'm also the executive director of Indonesian Youth Council for Tactical Changes, or IYTPC from Indonesia. So before I start talking about the social media that we have already in Indonesia, I just want to say Happy International Youth Day to everyone. Before delving into the moments taking place in Indonesia, I would like to initiate this discussion by reflecting on the irony inherent in discussing the role of young people can make the world better. We are grappling with issues today, such as the hazard posed by products like cigarettes, which have been passed down from the older generations, leaving the responsibility on the shoulder of the next generation. As a result, we often find ourselves addressing problems that we never initiated in the first place. So my point is, we demand an improvement to the leaders of countries in the world to make better policies that protect the next generation and hold the tobacco industry responsible for the problem they created before. So everyone, I want to start my talk by, we will talk about the social media by quoting Russell Rickford from Cornell University. He said that mass online interaction, exchange, and communication links people with common goals and values and assist social media users in gaining, maintaining, and cultivating resources and community support. So it is just like an opening to understand that social media has a power to share our vision and gather support from many communities. Because at the same time, social media is also being used by the tobacco industry to promote their product and narrative. Just like what Luis have already said before, the tobacco industry also use the feminism narrative just to promote their products, right? They don't even really care about the feminism, but they just care about their market. So for that, again, I think if it will be a loss if we didn't use social media as one of our tools to regenerate our power as a victim of this dangerous industry. So again, from my personal experience, social media has made activism more inclusive and accessible to the public. It eases the process of circulating the discourse of the movement. And then the internet has made social activism more democratic in the sense that everyone can access and follow any movement and has the option to join or not. And then citing Cortés Ramos, the internet has amplified and enhanced the possibilities of social activism. Here, social media serve as a platform for the viral dissemination of information that has a high impact potential on the public's opinion. Even though that a lot of people are also criticizing that social media has just created a slacktivism for us, and only movement that stops in the social media without being policy changes. But I think again, this slacktivism is not slacking actually, but it's just like a very good start to us to create a better movement, to create a bigger movement, and to create an inclusive movement. So here are things that we could do collectively to maximize our social media platform. The first one is craft a compelling narrative. So we need to develop a clear and impactful narrative that highlights the mission, goals, and importance of the social movement. And then we craft the message that resonates with the audience emotions and values. For example, in Indonesia, we created a petition to raise the price of cigarettes, framing it with the narrative that vulnerable groups in society often lack agency due to the fact that many men in their families spend money on cigarettes due to addiction instead of buying essentials like eggs, which cost nearly the same as cigarettes. Eventually, this petition garnered support from hundreds of thousands of Indonesian people, and then consequently, cigarette excise tax or tobacco tax were raised in Indonesia, despite a multiple of challenges. But I think this underscores the potential for effecting change by mobilizing people through social media. So we should have a compelling narrative, and it must be very specific targeted. For example, we want to create a petition, so we need to understand who are the targets that we want to gather. For example, just like we create the narrative that how the vulnerable groups can also get an impacted because of the cigarettes price that really cheap in Indonesia. And then the other one, we can also use hashtag and trends to create and promote unique and relevant hashtags to make the movement easily discoverable. We also know about the movement in the US, such as the Black Lives Matter, or maybe in Indonesia, for an example, we have a big movement since 1998, the biggest protests in Indonesia have already happened in 2019. In 2019, we create a big hashtag, Reformasi di Korupsi, or Reform Has Been Corrupted, which we call it as a momentum for us to create a better movement for the civil society. And then we create it by leveraging trending topics, and it can also help to amplify the message to broader audience. And then the impact is a lot of people comes to the street to join the protest. This is really, really unpredictable because we already know that protest in Indonesia is already limited because many regulation in Indonesia that limited the people to come to the protest. But by creating a hashtag, we can mobilize also people from the social media to come to the street and join the protest together. And then the other one, what I think is really, really important is we need to create a collaborations to broaden our social media, such as, for example, I really appreciate that GGTC also called an environmental and also economic topics in these sessions, because with the collaboration, we can also broaden the topic. For an example, that tobacco is not only about the public health problems, but we can talk to them, we can talk to the people that public health, that the tobacco is not only about the public health, but also environmental problem and economic problem. So by collaborations, it is not only broaden our topic, but also we make the movement become more inclusive, and many people can join us to join the movement itself. So I think the most important thing to also create the social media become more powerful is our storytelling, and then the storytelling can make a call to action. By creating a compelling stories of individuals affected by the issues the movement addresses, and personal stories can humanize the cause and inspiration. For example, we also collaborate and ask the victims of the direct tobacco use in Indonesia to tell the stories about how they can also be more empowered after they become the victim of the tobacco use in Indonesia. And after that, many people come, even the smoker itself, the active smoker itself, come to our movement, and then they also repost our social media, and they speak by tweeting that the tobacco industry have a very, very big problem in Indonesia, and they also realizes that they are the active smoker, but they support the tobacco control. So I think that's all the message that I want to tell you about the social media. But again, we need to remember that the success of a social movement on social media is not just about the number of followers or likes, but about the depth of engagement and the real world impact that is generated. So again, happy International Youth Day. I hope you guys can be more empowered. Thank you.
Thank you, Manik, for really highlighting the power that social media really has and how many people it can reach, as well as what it can lead to in terms of really powerful results on both the community as well as on the national and international level. I think one thing we can all agree on is that youth, we are the digital natives, the digital generation. So that is definitely a tool that is kind of ours, and we can really make it our own and make it shine for the correct causes. So we have next Judy De Los Reyes, and he's a youth advocate from the Philippines, currently working as a project coordinator of health justice and a member of the campaign team of the Global Youth for Tobacco Control, or the Y4TC network that has already been mentioned before. So he will share a little bit more about his experience on doing advocacy towards the children and youth. Judy, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm Judy, and I'm from the Philippines. I'm the current project coordinator of Health Justice Philippines, a nonprofit organization and a public health think tank that aims to bridge the gap between between health and law to empower Filipinos to make healthy choices. I just want to take a moment to share my journey in tobacco control advocacy. As a youth leader in my community, my passion revolves around educating not only young people, but also children about the importance of tobacco control. Every time I engage with fellow youth and pass on what I've learned about tobacco control and its impact on health, I'm reminded of a quote that deeply resonates my passion. It is easier to build a strong child than to repair a broken man. My advocacy goes beyond just spreading awareness. I strive to nurture the minds of children so that as they grow, they're equipped with the knowledge that the tobacco industry and its products won't bring anything positive in their lives. My dream is for them to not only understand this cause, but also to actively join in this advocacy. Together, we're working towards a healthier future for all. I'm also part of the Global Youth for Tobacco Control, or the Y4TC network. On top of all this, I just want to share that our organization, Health Justice Philippines, has been doing tobacco industry monitoring that contributes to the Global Tobacco Index. The Global Tobacco Industry Index Interference, the Global Tobacco Industry Interference Index is a global survey on how governments are responding to tobacco industry interference and protecting their public health policies from tobacco industry's commercial and vested interests as required under the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. This report is based on publicly available information on tobacco industry interference in countries and their respective governments' responses to these interferences. Countries are ranked according to the total scores provided by civil society groups. The lower the score, the lower the overall level of interference, which augurs well for the country. Yearly, our organization published the Tobacco Industry Interference Index for the Philippines. So it is a civil society review of the implementation of the FCTC Article 5.3 in the Philippines. And it is an important form of international cooperation, and the youth can contribute to this in around 80 countries. Thank you, everyone, and happy International Youth Day.
Thank you so much, Judy. We will very quickly jump back to South Africa for a couple more reflections by Lesego, now that we have heard from different country perspective across other regions as well, before we dive into the Q&A. Now, in the meantime, for all the participants in the call with us, please drop your questions into the Q&A box, because immediately after we will proceed to the Q&A part of the webinar. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Katja. I really do apologize for taking everybody back, and I understand also that we are running a bit tight on time, but I guess the nerves got the better of me and I just forgot most of the key things that I wanted to touch on. Do apologize a lot. I feel like I also did not properly introduce our organization, because it has done some quite important, I think, work for young people in South Africa. As you have mentioned, I am from the South African Tobacco Free Youth Forum. We are a youth-led organization that has, we are, I think, only 2 years old, so we're still quite young. But then over these 2 years, we've managed to get a wide network of close to 600 plus youth, tobacco control champions who have dedicated their efforts and have been fighting the war of, reframing the tobacco control narrative in their communities with us. So through our different various awareness campaigns, as I've said, we have been working at reconstructing the narrative of tobacco products, but also of tobacco control. Because with the former, it is mostly believed that some tobacco products are better than others. That's the trick that the industry sells. But then it's also something that can be seen in communities. This is mostly due to a lack of information shared on the harms and dangers of these products and what they actually constitute. But in terms of tobacco control, this is something that we actually were struggling with at the beginning of the organization. The fact that it can be quite a technical what's it called, technical field, and it's actually sometimes difficult for us to sort of like communicate what we need to share with young people. But simultaneously, tobacco control has also been painted as something that is, I think, that is stripping away the rights of people. So it has been important for us to make sure that young people know what tobacco control is trying to do and the many benefits that it brings to public health and to them specifically, because they are the main targets when it comes to the targets for the industry, and they are preyed upon the most. So I think one of the main things that I also wanted to share was in terms of engaging policymakers. I think the key thing that has been coming since through all of the presentations is how social media is so important, because I think there's a huge misconception, especially as advocates and as young people, that we do not have that a lot of access to policymakers, or they are far detached from us. And that can be a bit demoralizing, and it can be disempowering, because you might feel like you are speaking, you are advocating for something, but then it's falling on deaf ears. So I think the main thing that I wanted to also share is that, our voices, especially collectively, are very powerful. And this is something that we also learned, or rather we've observed, and that's the main strategy that we use to ensure that when we speak, especially on social media, to policymakers, we do not only speak as one voice, but then as a collective, because that's mostly when we are able to be heard. And also to just ensure that we do not work in isolation, and we also try to forge other partnerships. So many of the ways in which we were able to achieve what we do was to leverage on partnerships, and then ensure that we remember the power that the youth voice holds. So that's basically what I wanted to share, and I truly appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was still great to hear about the experience, about the challenges, everything that is happening in South Africa. So now, without further ado, we will proceed to the Q&A part of the webinar. So we will have about 15 to 20 minutes for this, and we'll try to cover as many of your questions as possible. So I would implore the speakers and really ask you to try to keep your answers short, preferably under a minute, so that we can, cover more ground and really hear from all the different perspectives. I will be joined for this part by Elvina Majiwa, and I will give her the floor to introduce herself very quickly.
Thank you so much, Katia. My name is Elvina Majiwa from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm a tobacco control champion associated with KETCA, or Kenya Tobacco Control and Health Promotion Alliance, as well as I'm a member of the Global Tobacco Control Youth, also known as Y4TC. So I'm really excited to be here today to celebrate the International Youth Day. So happy International Youth Day to everyone. So there are a number of questions and comments that came in. I'll start with some of the comments. There is Paula Laredo who says, greetings from Spain. I felt really inspired by your words regarding social media campaigning and have found your recommendations really useful. I have really struggled with the kickstarts of this kind of campaigns. What would you recommend to low impact accounts who have only a few followers yet? Thank you so much. I think this question is directed to Manik on social media. There was another comment. There was another comment.
Perhaps we can first go to Manik to answer this question. Also, if any other panelist wishes to jump in and also answer, feel free to do so. And I will give you the floor. So Manik, you can start with the answer.
Sure, okay. Can you also repeat again the question? Is it that I have already answered before? Sorry.
I believe this question has just arrived, so I am not. I don't think it has been answered yet.
Wait a minute. Can you repeat again the question?
All right, sure. Sure. So the question was from Paula Laredo, greetings from Spain. I felt really inspired by your words regarding social media campaigning and have found your recommendations really useful. I have really struggled with kickstarting such campaigns. What would you recommend to low impact accounts who only have a few followers?
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much for the question. So again, what I have said to you before, that our indicator of success is not only it's not only measured by our followers and likes. Yeah. Why? Because social media is more than just a followers and likes. It somehow can be very impactful and can be very influenced people. Even your followers is just only 5 until 10 people, but you can maximize that your followers, that they understand what is your vision, what is your goals, because by creating a very simple social media post, a very engaging social media post, and you create interaction between you and the followers, they can will be more very loyal to your post, very loyal to your content. And after that, they might be another influencer for their own family, for their own friends. So just don't give up, and then just feel that your followers is still very just like 5, 10, or maybe not more than 100. You just create it to be more consistent, because we don't ever know that more people might be become another influencers. I mean, they will refer your content, they will refer your social media posts to become their reference. So yep, just being consistent with your posts. I hope it answered your question.
Thank you so much. I'm sure if Paula has any follow-up questions, they will put it in the chat. Okay, Elvina, have you received any other questions?
Yes, I'd like to read 2 more. Benefo Isaac from Ghana says, in Ghana, tobacco control policies look good, but implementation of the laws are very weak. Moreover, many youth are unaware about the dangerous effects of these new emerging flavored tobacco products like shisha, vapes, and e-cigarettes. The tobacco industry is currently using celebrities to advertise, and for 8 years, tobacco tax was increased this year. Yet cigarettes are very cheap because of the tax system here. How can we find resources to create awareness to the youth and also expose the industry interference here in Ghana? So the question is about resources. How can we get resources to create awareness?
Perfect. Does any of the panelists wish to take this question on? You can also raise your hand so that it's a bit more visible if you wish to give it a go.
One thing, I'll go ahead and take this. One thing that I know about advocating for implementation practices, best implementation practices, is making sure that the lawmakers know the problem directly. So making sure that lawmakers know that celebrities are promoting this, because oftentimes lawmakers are often kept out of this and enclosed by the tobacco industry from the real problem. And so by making them aware of the problem, showing them evidence of the issue, is something that we have seen been a great success. We were actually at the United States Capitol last month, advocating for some policy changes, and a lot of the lawmakers didn't really understand the depth of the problem until we showed them. So we brought them the products, we brought them some of the products and showed them some of the flavors. We showed them the marketing in our area. We showed them pictures of the product placement. And so it's those type of things that help make the lawmakers aware of the problem. So then we can advocate for working in those railroads into the implementation practices to ensure that it gets done correctly.
Super. Thanks so much, DJ. Does any other panelists wish to also add on to that? Yes, Lesego, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I think I think it was also oh yeah, so it was said at the beginning of the session how this is such an issue that is very, very relevant to young people and is therefore our responsibility. It's always important to start from within. So in addition to SET5, I'm also a member of a growing organization that is still trying to find its feet. It's a network of young ambassadors across different continents in Africa. So one of the things that in some of our discussions, one of the things that we spoke about pertaining to resources is because we understand that the work that we do usually mobilizing young people, making sure that the word is spread across. It's something that is very difficult and resource intensive. But then one of the things that was suggested was that since this is something that we've seen in our communities and sort of like we've seen this as a challenge, and then it is now sort of like in our hands to work towards it. We can always start from inside, right? So if you have a certain amount that you're able to fundraise towards the project or towards a certain activity, we should always try to also give into the effort, because what we're fighting for is something that's greater. That's one of the main things. But then secondly, though, and something that is quite difficult, fundraising at a higher level. So getting grants is something that can be very, very difficult to coordinate, but then that's something that also helps. And also I think in terms of also looking for grants and financial assistance, for resources, I specifically, it's important to also look broadly, because I think sometimes we can be under the impression that tobacco control just focuses on health, and therefore whenever we knock on doors, we're only knocking on the health doors. But then we need to at least maybe open it up more, focus on the economics, focus on the environment, focus on young people, education. There's usually some form of funding within government sometime, or within these different ministries, which is allocated to programs that are geared towards not only, I guess, substance abuse, but then also empowering young people and making sure that they do not make or partake in risky behaviors. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else, or shall we proceed to the next question? Okay, Elvina, go ahead.
All right, thank you so much. There's a very interesting comment here by Feben E.T. So they say, in India still, companies like Indian Tobacco Company is having huge influence in government levels, which makes the anti-tobacco movement less influential. They're even funding different organizations and making platforms to increase the tobacco market in India. India is facing huge tobacco issues. So that was a comment. I'll read a comment and a question from Andrew Arnold Kalema. In Uganda, we have a tobacco control law, and among the law is having warning signs on tobacco cigarette packaging. However, I noticed some cigarettes among young people with no warning health signs. How best can we as young people push for the government and enforcers to address this, even though I try to post on social media about it? So how can we do this?
Yeah, I'm going to start with this one too, just because enforcement, is something that it's really important, right? We also have recently a new judge in a lawsuit ordered that certain tobacco companies have to put warning labels on their products, and we still also have not seen all of them yet either. And so one thing that we're doing right now is, yes, social media is a good platform, but your lawmakers don't actually control their own social media, and if they do, they're not really looking at it like that. So so one thing that we're doing is going directly to them and repainting the issue. So one thing that we are constantly finding ourselves having to do is to reiterate how big of an issue, how big of a deal this is, and how many people it's killing, how many members of their community that it's harming, how bad of an impact that it has on education and development. And so, and then a lot of times, a lot of lawmakers don't like when their laws that they spend time making aren't enforced or aren't being respected. And so, kind of bringing that to their attention directly. So letters, emails, phone calls, all of those things, directly speaking with them and their staff, and letting them know that these companies are violating this. And for enforcement, not only should you do something now to enforce it, but you should make sure that there are guidance in place for future legislation to make sure that it is enforced in the future too.
Super. Yeah, Manny, go ahead.
Yep, I'm really agree with DJ answer before. Yep. Well, the main thing is social media alone is not enough. We need more than social media use. It's just like how we can connect with the champion in the policymakers. I mean, we should use our social media to expose who are the policymakers that go with the tobacco industry. And then we need also to tell the people who are our policymakers that go and become our champion. And then after that, we can see who are more accountable of the people. I mean, we can monitor the work of our officers and the policymakers so we can understand, and it more be very political action, right? I mean, if they don't support the tobacco control movement, then we don't need to choose them again in the next election, right? And then if we find a new champion that have committed with a very good tobacco control policies, then we can invest to them, and hopefully they can become our champion in the legislative or maybe in the executive. So, yep, my point is we need to make our social media integrated to the political actions. So our political policymakers can very fear, because the people can monitor them by social media, and they will be lost of the maybe voters, because yeah, we can spread, or we call it as a naming and shaming strategy. We tell them who are with the tobacco industry and who are support our tobacco control movement. So we can also create the shaming by mention who are the politicians and then who are the tobacco industry that they are cooperated. So after that, hopefully we can have a better policy. And one, I think this is also referred to the previous question. I think the most powerful resource that we have is evidence, because a cigarette is dangerous is undeniable data, undeniable evidence. So we can create this evidence, become more humanized and become more easy to understand. So people and the policymakers will understand that they are in our side.
Super. Thank you so much. Because we are running a little bit short on time, I have one final question towards all the panelists. And that is, if you had to choose, what would you choose as the biggest, major challenge that you're facing right now? And what is the number one lesson you learned as a youth advocate? Who would like to take a swing at it first? Maybe Ratri, you can.
Well, if we talk about challenges, I mean, there are a lot of challenges we face as a youth. For example, if we talk about that, mobilizing the youth is never easy, right? I mean, there are distractions and overload of other factors that influence. For example, in today's fast-paced world, young people are bombarded with a constant stream of information, entertainment, distractions. They have their own commitments. And if we talk about that, also there can be lack of awareness. I mean, everyone is not aware of the harmful effect. I mean, it's not about the direct effects. It's also about the passive impacts that a tobacco consumption leads to other person who is not even consuming the product. And then there are obviously time constraints, that balancing the academic commitments, the personal lives, and the extracurricular activities, maintaining all that things, they're often we can see that youth are lacking in their timing to be committed about and be consistent about their work of or their attention to specifically on the tobacco control. So this also have a challenge, and also about the communication gap of different generations. I mean, tobacco is a product that is not just consuming by the young or the middle-aged or the olders. It is there in every generation. So handling all the generations with similar tactics here will not work. So we have to go through different strategies. We have to understand their perspective. Also, as it is a matter of behavioral change, structural change, and also there is connected of politics and other several factors of conflict of interests. So tackling all that together, handling everything and balancing it out, yet without offending anyone, put across your point, is a challenge. But as we say, we are youth, we are optimistic about everything in this world. So if we want, we can bring the positive change, and we can bring awareness everywhere. So that is it. You just have to hope, and you just have to be optimistic and consistent about it. That is it.
So that optimism really needs to guide the way. Perfect. So do we perhaps have maybe Louise or Elena that would like to also share the challenge and lesson? Yeah, Louisa, go ahead.
Quickly, I think a challenge has been for decision makers to really have our voices heard and taken seriously. I think when young people come up with ideas against the tobacco industry, we tend to get dismissed quite easily. So really ensuring that our voices are heard, valued, and considered in shaping the policies that actually affect us, that has been a very big challenge. But then a lesson learned is, like, as frustrating as it is to work with these issues every day and the small steps you take, just remember that every small thing matters, and there will be change if you just keep on nagging your decision makers and being a pain in the ass towards the tobacco industry, because that's what we have to do. Like, they are the major enemy, and yeah, we can fight them if we just look at all of the things that has been happening the recent 50 years. Yeah, we can make a change.
Thank you so much. Now let's go to Elena for our last statement of the panel.
Oh my gosh, so much pressure. I agree with what everyone has said so far, and I don't want to repeat anything. I think something different and a lesson that I have learned, testifying and putting yourself out there legislatively can be really scary. I think that's also a factor why it's hard to mobilize youth, because we're all in our rooms and online. It can be hard to put ourselves out there. When I testified at a council meeting for the first time, I had no idea what to say. But I had a lot of mentors who guided me through the process. You don't have to drop a bunch of legal jargon or know exactly what is going on. You just have to talk about your experiences, what you care about, what you're seeing in your community, because that's what they want to hear. They want to hear your voices, what you're going through, and your opinion. And so I think my whole lesson is just come as you are, you matter, and your voice just as is enough.
Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you to all the panelists for your super powerful messages today. It was wonderful hearing all of your stories, all the amazing things that you are doing on different levels. So now, without further ado, we have two super exciting things to end this webinar on. We have a special video that we have prepared for you, and this video will be used as a part of the campaign towards the COP that will be happening at the end of this year, the COP that is actually on tobacco control. And we really wish the politicians and decision makers start listening to the young people. Now, during the video itself, while it will be playing, everyone on the participants list will actually get elevated into a panelist role. So if you have the option to then turn on your camera, please do so we can take a group photo at the end of the webinar. Now, Laura, please feel free to play the video.
As youths, we need to develop skills to create a greener world. However, this cannot be achieved while tobacco industry continue to harm our generation and the planet.
It's time to prioritize the well-being and safety of young people over the interest of tobacco and related industries and those that voice their interests.
We call on governments and COP delegates to make decisions that take into account the impact on future generations.
In making your decisions, we implore you to consider the well-being of our youth and our planet as a top priority.
Please promote measures that prevent innovations and attractive features in tobacco products, and that prevent the sale of novel recreational addictive products.
Please adopt decisions that will hold the tobacco industry liable for past, present, and future harms.
Thank you so much. So just to give you a little bit of a hint as to what the photo will be used for, we actually plan on adding the photo of everyone in this webinar to the video, so to the end of the video, so that everyone can really be a part of the cause, really be a part of the journey. And as the last thing that we want to mention is that we also are releasing through a press release a youth statement that we will be using for our advocacy efforts towards the COP10 that you can sign on to if you belong to an organization. And if you are interested in signing on to this, then please feel free to reach out to Laura. I think she will drop the correct email in the chat so that you can get in touch with her. We're really looking forward to seeing multiple organizations from across the world. Doesn't matter if you're youth-led, youth-focused, grown-up, or anything in between. Everyone is welcome to sign on to the youth statement and really push towards a better future when it comes to tobacco control and younger generations. So in case I have forgotten anything, Laura, please feel free to add on to that. But if that is it, then I would invite everyone to turn on your cameras and smile very brightly and widely for the photo that we will be taking. Celebrate the International Youth Day together with us. And as you can see on the screens behind us, don't forget, your decisions matter. So let's protect our future and stop tobacco together. Thank you, everyone.